Hey everybody, this is my second video here for Nether Springs for my business. So last time, if you remember, if you were watching, I was talking about H. pylori. H. pylori is a bacteria that can be in the gut. But one of the things I mentioned, and one of the things I want to cover right now, is something called Candida albicans, which is a fungus that grows also on the tongue. It's called thrush. You might have heard of it in little babies. And it goes all the way down the esophageal area right into the colon, and it will actually colonize, it will actually take over your body. So what I wanted to do today was show you guys, this is from about 1996, and these were me studying Candida. So if some of you know my story, I'll just tell it here real quick. Over time, it didn't happen, overnight, but I would say probably in the middle 90s, I started having all sorts of problems. I mean, if you remember the middle 90s, you guys, there was no internet. You couldn't get on there and search things out. So I was going to doctor after doctor. We had good insurance, so I was seeing a lot of doctors. Nobody could help me. Well, I call Candida albicans problems the invisible illness. I call it that because it really can't be seen, and it really can't be tested. So you might ask me, well, how do I know if people have it then? Well, it's a tricky thing, and this is where understanding, first of all, what it is, and then understanding how it manifests in the body. Thirdly, how to treat it, which I've learned over the years to do naturally in a really wonderful way. You just get to know. I know it sounds, I'm going to talk to you about that today. This is one of my favorite books. If you ever see it anywhere, buy it. Look for it online. In fact, this one's almost brand new. I found it on a used site because these are no longer being printed. It came out in the 70s. It's called The Missing Diagnosis. And here was a doctor, Dr. Truss, MD, who started to figure out something. In fact, look at this title. They may say that you're neurotic, but do you experience? And then it's got depression, anxiety, irrational irritability, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, heartburn, indigestion, loss of self-confidence. That's a big one. You see, even with Candida, we get so full of anxiety and fears. That's a big part of it, especially for women. And we're wandering around going, what happened to my mojo, right? Inability to cope. I actually call it emotional fragility, the inability to really focus and even get through life, coping. Lethargy, symptoms from contact with foods, chemical odors, acne, migraine headaches. You see, this is a big deal, you guys. This is a really big deal. And because it's not a common thing even looked for with doctors, they're not even going to suggest it. And why would it not be in their best interest to suggest it? Because every single drug, including some over-the-counters, all, what? Create this condition. So even though in the 50s and the 40s when antibiotics were first hitting the scene, and I don't know about you, I'm 60, so I remember when it was the miracle. I mean, this is the miracle answer. And that's how it was looked at, and yes, it did do a lot of wonderful things for people and help them with their health. But we didn't understand the side effect. And like I said in the last video about H. pylori, when you come in with a bomb, and technically antibiotics are a bomb. If you think of the word antibiotic, it actually means anti-life. Antibiotic, anti-life. What does the word probiotic mean? Probiotic, pro-life. You understand? So when you really look at what an antibiotic or other drugs do, it bombs out everything, not just your problem. It's similar to chemo in that way, if you've done chemo for cancer. So we have a few doctors or a few people who think, okay, well, you've got a problem with yeast and you've got a vaginal infection if it's a woman or whatever. We're going to give you something called diflucan. So if anybody watching, if you had diflucan, it's a pill. It's a prescription pill. In fact, they usually have to check your liver first to even find out whether you can take this pill. It's so potent. So what would it do? It would get to the liver. It would get into the bloodstream for 1 to 2 days. Might knock out something that's in your blood, but does it cover where the Candida and the yeast problem really is? Nope. Because where is it? Because guess what I do, you guys? One of the things I do is colon therapy. So I have a machine, and I clean out people's bowels. I mean, the machine does it really, but so I get to see a lot of yeast, and I know where it lives. So what is yeast? Yeast is a fungus. It's not a bacteria. So in other words, if you take an antibiotic, you guys, for your mouth, for your tooth, if you take an antibiotic for, I don't know, some other problem in your life, you've also created a whole other set of problems. This is what people don't realize, right? I took it for my tooth, but I didn't realize that I killed all the bacteria in my body, and now I have a condition. Also, antibiotics are for bacteria. Antibiotics are not for fungus. What is yeast again, you guys? What is it? Fungus. If you have mold in your bathroom, on your shower stall, you have to really find out ways to get that off. It doesn't come off just with normal killers, right? What do we all normally do? Vinegar or hydrogen peroxide or bleach, right? That's fungus. So fungus loves to live in certain kinds of places. Think about what it does. It lives in dark places, damp places, right? It likes environments that are devoid of one thing. Do you know what it's devoid of? Are you thinking with me? Oxygen, light. It loves to live in these types of places. Well, what do you think happens? Because we're all born with yeast. I got born with it, you got born with it. Everybody has a balance, a symbiotic balance in their gut and in their colon of lots of things. You know, we have lots of different kinds of bugs, and one of the bugs is yeast. We all have a little. The problem is it's a really strong thing, and given the chance, given opportunities, it will actually take over. It will become the strongest thing. And unlike other bacteria and other things, it lets off almost probably the most toxins into the bloodstream and into the body, more so than other things do. So Candida, at last count, I used to say 78 known toxic effects from it that go into the blood. But I was listening to Dr. Carolyn Dean the other day, and she was saying 170 something, or it was a way higher amount of toxins from yeast and Candida. I always say to people, if your doctor doesn't believe in it, or if you've got health problems and your person you're going to does not believe in it, something's wrong with them and something's wrong with their understanding. Because I always say this, it may not be your first cause of your illness, but once your illness has taken hold, it will take over. So when I went to school, yeast and yeast conditions were told to me by my professors that it's the last thing you deal with, right? You deal with this, and then if there's a yeast problem down the road, down there, if you see that, then you would deal with that. In my experience as a colon therapist and a nutritionist and all the work I'm doing with people, and I work one-on-one with people, I'm not just sending them off to my assistant, I've never seen that. I've seen this problem. When yeast is so prevalent in the gut, small and large intestine, and when it has really colonized the body, there's so many toxins that it sends out that it literally paralyzes the immune system. So if it paralyzes the immune system and it's giving off so many toxins that it's smothering everything, how is it possible that you're going to treat somebody for something else and have them respond well? I've never seen them respond well. So what I do first is I've developed a technique, it's not a whole bunch of pills, of where I kill the yeast. I start killing the yeast and the fungal takeover in the esophageal throat, all the way down through to the stomach and the colon. Now, when I do that, I like to include enemas or colonics, because if I can get at it this way, we can make a huge difference. Do you know what it's like? It's like buying a house that's overgrown and the house has been taken over, right? And you got a good deal, but you got to get in there and you got to clean up that outside. And so the grass is so high, you can't bring in a lawnmower. So what do? You bring in a scythe and you start cutting it down by hand so you can get that grass low, so that after that you could bring a lawnmower in. And when I'm working with somebody who's got a lot of undefinable illness and they're sick and they got a lot of gut issues, I want to bring in that scythe. I want to get it down to a manageable level so we can now start working with the real problem. So because Candida manifests in almost every single body system, it can be a lot of things. I mean, I've seen it be palpitations. I've seen people who thought they have heart problems a lot. They're going to the doctor because they've got panic attacks, their heart's beating all over the place. That's a really big one. Anxiety, people ending up on, I did, 1997 right through till about 2001, I was on antidepressants. I was on anti-anxiety. I was on muscle relaxers because my muscles hurt so bad. That's another sign of it. When it takes over the guts, it makes you just feel achy all the time. I was on, what else was I on? Well, they didn't have Xanax yet, so I was on Klonopin, which is like Valium, only worse, and it killed me. If you ever read the biography of Stevie Nicks, she had a harder time getting off of Klonopin than she ever did getting off of cocaine. So this is a real thing, folks. This is such a real thing. And what I'm really discouraged about is last year I completed my health coaching degree. And this is an up-to-date school. This is an up-to-date 40-year-old man who's written a few, if I said his name, you guys would know, very potent books on health. I was really impressed to even get in his school. And so back in the 90s and the 80s, we had lots of books on Candida, and if you remember, there was a book called The Yeast Connection by William Crook, which was amazing. But the nowadays people, since we now have, functional medicine doctors and functional medicine practitioners who are doing a lot more lab testing with better labs. We have labs that do better work than the old school stuff because they didn't even find a lot of things in the old days. They're kind of discounting Candida in another way. They're basically saying, well, that 80s and 90s stuff, those were hippies, we get it, they were all into that, but we have testing now, and we have different things that we do now, and we have ways that we deal with this that's different. And when I went through this entire year of this course and talking about all sorts of autoimmune disorders, hypothyroidism, MS, we were talking about, I'm trying to think of some of the others right now, and I can't off the top of my head. You guys, all the autoimmune disorders we all hear about, even fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, everything. It never came up. It never came up with any of these practitioners of my professors. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is always a player. Now, it may not be your first cause. In my particular story, I didn't find out till I was 42 that I was gluten intolerant. And what was I doing? I was making homemade bread with a Bosch bread maker and my own mill. So I was grinding my own wheat even. And I didn't know I was gluten intolerant. Well, when you're gluten intolerant, your body is entirely in inflammation, which was me. I was totally inflamed. Anytime there's inflammation in the body, what comes roaring in? Yeast, hello. And then I was on all these prescription drugs, what do all prescription drugs do? Not even, you guys, just antibiotics. Even taking lots of Tylenol. It kills your good flora. So I was sitting there ripe for this problem I had with all these prescription drugs and everything, and eating this wheat that was killing my gut, giving me leaky gut syndrome. We didn't know yet about genetically modified foods, but I'm sure they started in the 90s. I had all this going on, and my gut was raw, and I was sicker and sicker until finally they said, eventually, you have MS, you have lupus, you have fibromyalgia, you have chronic fatigue syndrome, and then about 2 years later, I found a lump in my breast, and I had breast cancer. When they tested me for the breast cancer, I also had the gene. So now they're saying, oh, look you have no choices whatsoever. You have a gene. You have a gene for breast cancer. So if you have that, it's just a matter of time, right? And by this point, I'd been on drugs for 7 years. I had come through the fire to get well. I was weaning off all those drugs. And I said to that man, that doctor, I will not do chemo. I will not do a double mastectomy. I will find a way to get well. I don't know how yet because I've got all these autoimmune disorders. I actually told him, if you put me on chemo right now with all these autoimmune disorders, I'm going to be sick. I'm going to die from the chemo. And he was like, no, you're not. You must be one of those people that go on Google. Well, yeah, thankfully I was. And then I started going back to school. So here's the thing. I started treating as the very first thing I did for myself, long before I was a practitioner. I started treating my gut. Nobody was talking about guts then, you guys. This wasn't now. I started to figure it out. I didn't know what SIBO was, and I didn't know what SIFO was. Now, what are those two acronyms? SIBO is small intestine bacterial overgrowth, and SIFO is small intestine fungal overgrowth. Well, they talk about SIBO a lot nowadays, but they're not talking much about SIFO. SIFO is a real deal. When you got a gut takeover of yeast, you can't eat nothing. Do you know I could eat like 2 foods a day? And if you're like me and you're down to eating nothing, and you're just down to eating a couple foods a day because you don't know what's wrong with you and you're sensitive to everything, that was me. I couldn't even take a pill. If I went to a natural-minded doctor who gave me even supplements, I got sick on them. I couldn't even do supplements, you guys, if you're like me. Hey, I'm you. And when there's a takeover of the gut, mostly fungus, can be bacteria too. I didn't have H. pylori, some people do. You can't eat nothing. Everything you eat, you're down to this thing in your brain of this grid. You're like, okay, what can I eat now? I'm eating oatmeal every day. I had met this lady, she ate oatmeal 6 times a day because she felt it was the only thing she could eat. That's a gut problem, right? Why do I tell you today about Candida? This is part 1. Why? Because it's always, 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 you get that word? A player. May not be your source of your original problem, but it's a player. So today, I'm just going to say this, I've got a full day of work here. Hey, it's Columbus Day and we got a holiday and that's when everybody wants to get in. They have their day off work. So I'm going to be talking more, but I just wanted to bring up to you, I'm going to read these again to you guys. The missing diagnosis. They may say that you're neurotic, but do you experience depression, anxiety, irrational irritability? Hey, and that's not just menopause, right? Bloating, diarrhea, constipation, heartburn, indigestion, loss of self-confidence, inability to cope, lethargy, symptoms from contact with foods, chemical odors, acne, migraine headaches. I had migraine so bad as a 13-year-old, I'd go to school and have one every day. In women, urethritis, which would be like UTI infections. You get a lot of UTIs, this is something you want to look at. Cystitis, repeated vaginal yeast infections, premenstrual tension, a lot of PMS, and menstrual problems. You know, you got problems, you got cysts everywhere, you got all sorts of stuff happening. In children, hyperactivity, irritability, learning problems, recurrent ear infections, diaper rash, abdominal discomfort, diarrhea, constipation, poor appetite, erratic sleep problems. You know, this is a real issue. And I'm going to be doing a series of videos here to talk about it, and I will get to how to deal with it. But anyway, you guys have a really wonderful day. I want to upload this video so you can all see it before I get going for my day and you get going for your day. So have a good one, you guys, and I'll be pretty soon doing part 2. So we'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.